Good evening and welcome to the October 2021 meeting of the Harbor and Coastal Zone Management Commission. Folks, if you're listening at home and you experience any problem, we are on LMC TV tonight. We are also on Zoom at the link on the publicly posted agenda.
2021 meeting of the Harbor and Coastal.
My apologies. I think the live stream loaded. I'll put myself on mute.
We have the live stream running on LMC TV, also on our YouTube channel, and on the on Zoom. And if you're looking for Zoom, which you will need to do if there's public comment period, which we anticipate there may be, that link is at the top of the agenda. And if you're paying attention, thank you for caring about village affairs. I'm going to move to open the meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
The meeting is open. I'm going to call our first agenda item. That is the Foreshore Road application. Do we have the applicant with us?
Yes, I see her on here. Let me promote her to panelist so she can speak. Okay, I think you're there if you unmute yourself. Okay.
Hi, good evening. Azure D. Sleitcher of Race Coastal Engineering, consultant for the applicant Robert Goodman, Foreshore Road. At our last meeting, the commission asked for a few items to be clarified, and we've since submitted those items. I can run through them quickly. One question was regarding the deed for the lands underwater, which we submitted. The second item was confirmation of the top of the proposed anchor pilings for the dock, and the relationship to other dock pilings in the neighborhood and other applications that were recently approved. So the top 18, which is to prevent the float from coming off the piles during the 100-year base flood from FEMA, and One Shore Road approved last year by the commission. The other item was the commission requested that we consider putting stone veneer in the exposed face.
Hang on just a second. First of all, we're having audio difficulty, and I think
Sorry, say
Andrew,
again. I didn't.
We're having some audio difficulty where you're breaking up and freezing.
Oh.
It may, if you can dial in for audio, we may get a better result.
Sure.
That was your comment, Andrew?
Yeah, I didn't hear the answer to the first piling issue. If we could repeat that.
I turned off my video. Is my audio any better?
It appears to be.
I'm hearing you okay.
Azure, can you just restate the first
if you don't mind, I'll stick with this format. So
can you please restate the
yes, so our cutoff elevation is plus 17, which is 2 feet above the base flood elevation of 15 in this area, and it's the elevation is to prevent the float from coming off the piles in the event of a flooding situation. And that elevation is consistent with approvals in the neighborhood, specifically One Shore Road, that was approved by the commission last year.
So the height of the piles at One Shore and Foreshore are the same or different?
Correct. They're the same.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So the other item was a request to consider stone veneer on the exposed surface of the concrete landing for the gangway. Portion of the seawalls to be removed and concrete in its place to support the new gangway. And we did add and send in modified plans that showed we will add veneer to that exposed face in order to keep the character of the stone seawall from the water side looking towards the property. And lastly, the commission requested an aerial photo exhibit showing the proposed dock structure in relation to other docks in the neighborhood as far as the extent offshore and the distance from other features, including Crane Island and the Mill Pond Weir. So we had submitted that as part of our September 21st submission. And if you need me to pull any of this stuff up, I can share my screen. But otherwise, those were the items that were discussed at the last meeting and subsequently at our site visit in September.
Okay, if you'd finished, I think I only have one question. And I think we covered this before, but remind me, please. There's a bottom stop to make sure that at low tide, the dock doesn't bottom out. What elevation is that at?
It's a requirement from the Army Corps of Engineers. If the water depth is less than 2.5 feet under the dock at low tide, then it will be outfitted with bracing to prevent the float from bottoming out at low tide.
Okay, so there's both a top stop and a bottom stop.
There's no top stop. It's a bottom stop that attaches to the 4 pilings to suspend the dock at least 2.5 feet above the mud line. But otherwise,
Okay.
the dock just floats up and down on the piles.
Are there,
Okay.
are there any objections on your side to just putting one of those on no matter what?
Not necessarily. I think if the water is deep enough, which we believe it to be at least 3 feet in that area at low tide, it's just more infrastructure for, that requires maintenance and other, things, when the dock is removed, for the season and the 4 pilings are there, that bracing will remain. And so, it's a potential, underwater obstruction, when the dock's not there. And if, during high tide, people don't know that it's there. So if it's not necessary, I think we would not prefer to have it. And certainly the water depths will be verified, once the pilings are installed and before the dock is brought into place, the water depths at low tide will be verified, and that infrastructure would certainly be included if it's necessary.
Okay, so then maybe let me ask the more complicated question that I thought maybe I wouldn't have to ask, depending on the answer to that. But can you help me understand how the low, I think it's mean low water is calculated? It seems like there'd be variability there. And, I've at least heard anecdotally, and I think a lot of us in the village are familiar, that the water just gets very, very low at times in that location. So maybe you could help me understand if you're confident the water is always above 2.5 or 3 feet, or most of the time it is, or how you think about that.
Yeah, the bottom would be measured, from an elevation. So we're not going out at any particular tide event. The bottom would be measured for elevation purposes, and mean low water is defined as elevation minus 3.9 in this location. So the requirement is at least 2.5 feet above that minus 3.9. So it's a very specific elevation that's measured in the field, and not subject to interpretation of any particular tide or time of day or time of year.
And with your experience with that, which seems like a rational way to do it, I'm not familiar with it, so it seems like that's probably the industry standard. But Is there variability around where the low water truly is in your experience?
Absolutely. I mean, the mean low water is just that. It's a mean taken over, a time series. But it is the industry established baseline for, that the Army Corps and DEC use for, determining the requirement for the float stops.
And then last question, and thank you for this. I'm sure maybe some of this you don't even know, but let me know on this last question anyway, which is, do you know what their tolerance threshold is? Do they set it there because P99 confidence interval, this thing is never touching the bottom, or do they set it there and they're like, yeah, a couple times a year it'll touch the bottom, but usually it won't? Do you have any sense of the tolerance that industry standard is based on?
I honestly do not. And again, 2.5 feet from mean low water, I think over the course of the year, that's I would say it's unlikely to get below that. So there's always going to be some clearance. For instance, in Connecticut, it's only 18 inches from that same data point. So I think across the environmental agencies in the area, they've some are as low as 18 and some in DC, New York, it's 2.5, but I think that covers kind of the range of how much lower a tide could expected to be over the course of any given year or time frame.
Got it. And so, sorry, just one more last question. This is probably obviously true, I hope, but do you take the elevation off the highest point underneath the envelope of the dock? Is that what you base it off of?
Yeah, so it would be based on the elevations typically drop off as you head offshore, so it would be taken from the most inshore point of the dock, where it would be the most shallow.
Yeah, intended to be the shortest or highest or whatever you'd call it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So Azure, the stops at 2.5 feet were on the one shore road dock, correct?
Yes, again, that's a standard requirement from DEC and Army Corps when you have relatively shallow water.
Yeah. From my experience looking at that shore, I think it's all more or less the same. I understand that there could be some variations in depth, but I personally would just like to see those stops there. I think it's a good environmental safeguard, unless there's a substantial burden to the applicant. Can you just inquire about putting those on anyway?
Sure. And for the sake of attempting to close this application tonight, if that's a sticking point, then we'll agree. It's not a significant cost expenditure. And if that's what we need to do to move this ahead, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, if it's not a significant thing, I just think it works. It's probably better for the applicant. He can still use his dock if the dock is resting on those stops, and it just protects the seafloor. And it's consistent with everything else we've done on similar applications.
Okay. Yes. I'd be happy to.
That, I would personally feel better, but.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
Andrew and Seamus got to the points that I knew I wanted to address, and I just want to make sure that Randy, Jack, Cammie, and Lisa have a chance to be heard if they want to. Lisa, do you have further questions? Randy,
Covered what I was interested in.
Cammie,
I have no questions.
Jack.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, we had briefly opened a public session on this, but the public had a hard time accessing it during that meeting due to some technical difficulties. And I think the right thing to do for the public is to reopen a public session. I'm going to move now to do that. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Public session is open. If there are members of the public that want to comment on this application, you may do so. If you're on Zoom, use the raise hand function, and Stephen will let you in so you can be heard.
Have any of the neighbors reached out? Either to the applicant or to us that we're aware of?
No one has reached out to the applicant that we're aware of.
And I don't see any raised hands from any attendees.
Okay. And I didn't expect any, but it's only, so it's the right thing to do to give the public a chance to comment on every application. And I think before most people didn't have access. So I thought we needed to reopen that. I move at this time to close the public session on the Foreshore Road application. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, public comment is closed on the Foreshore Road application. Okay, straw poll time. Do we believe that we have enough information to vote on this application? Remember that on this, we are not only consistency, but the permitting authority under our LWRP and harbor plan. Andrew?
I have enough information, Thomas.
Seamus?
Yes, for me.
Randy?
Yes.
Cami?
Yes.
Jack?
Good to go.
Lisa?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to call a vote that we adopt a resolution granting the application and finding it consistent. Andrew?
Yes.
Seamus?
I think that we heard that the stops would be on the bottom. I believe that should be either, I believe that'll need to be in our resolution, since it's not, I believe, on the drawings. I mean, I know we don't like to do, what do we call them? Conditions, but how do you want to address that?
Yeah, you know what, Seamus, I thought this was probably my procedural mistake. I thought that I heard the applicant commit to doing the stops. I think it's pretty clear that several of us think it's a lot easier to reach a decision on this application if the stops are there. I think that too. It's probably easier to clarify that we are deeming the application amended, and the applicant is on board with that.
Yes, and we do have these float stops on our drawings. There was a note that's, said that there was a contingency for water depth, which we would be happy to remove, whether or not you place a condition in your resolution.
Yeah, I think that's deemed amended. That's not conditional. That's deemed amended. That's now part of the plan. That's on our record. So Andrew, I know you're for. Seamus?
Yeah, and sorry for that. I was just trying to clarify how we'd get that in the record. Consistent.
Cami?
Consistent.
Jack?
Good.
Randy?
Consistent.
Lisa?
Consistent.
And we are unanimous, consistent. Okay, we'll have the formal resolution done, and I have, I think, 3 business days to sign it, which gives me Monday. We are completed with this application. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Schleicher. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thanks to the commission. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
That is our only private applicant item. We have 2 administrative items up. I'm going to take we added at the last minute an administrative item for the new correspondence from the state of New York. If nobody minds, I'm going to take this out of order and address that first, because I think I know what we have to do with that one. For anyone at home who's been paying attention to this, and for the new commissioners who don't have the institutional memory, this is not our first recent experience with the state's process. And when the state asks us if we can identify to them any issues with consistency of a state project, we have tried telling the state in the past that we identify no particular issues, but that we expect them to come back to us when they have a site plan completed, et cetera. They do not recognize that process. They run their own process a little differently from a private applicant. And this is the last chance we will get to speak. But if we do identify issues, they will work cooperatively with us to address consistency. If we say that we don't see any issues, even if we append to that we like it to come before us, we know that that will not happen. So what we have to do is, even if it's somewhat speculative, identify any potential issue that we have. I think the only way for us to do that efficiently here, since we got it tonight and none of us has had a chance to do more than glance at it, is form a sub-quorum working group. Quorum for this commission is 4, even when we're understaffed, and we are now fully staffed once again. Quorum for this commission is 4, therefore a sub-quorum working group can be 2 or 3. I'm looking for volunteers on this. We have 30 days from receipt of the letter to make comments. In practice, the quicker we turn around to first draft, the better. If we could do it in a week, that would be great. Since we are subject to open meeting law, we will not be able to meet again, or we can't have confidence that we'll be able to meet again and discuss in a full meeting the draft. We might be able to make it for a working group. Probably what we have to do is get a draft we're happy with and send it from the chair and vice chair. Who wants to take a look at this application and identify any of our policies that we may have to work with the state to resolve on this?
I'll volunteer.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, and I'm happy to as well. And maybe once we have a group, I do have a question or two on the exact process, just very quick in a moment.
Sure. Okay. And if you guys can get a draft together, you can send around to everybody, but in order to not deliberate outside the context of an open meeting, we can't have a roundtable about it. We can look at it, comments go directly to the chair. What's your question?
Yeah, so because I think that 30 days would probably give us our November work session if we wanted to. But I just was curious what you thought we would try to accomplish. Would it be to send a letter to the state telling them, here are some of our 44 policies that we think are impacted, so please come with an application to a meeting? Or should the letter that we send be, here are our issues, please address these, and then we'll see how they react to it? Because I don't know the state process quite well enough.
I think the lesson that we learned from the last time that we tried to get the state to focus on our policies, that we are better off being more detailed than less. We may be able to get them to a meeting. My guess is that they will want to work this sort of in a roundtable fashion with their personnel, and that they will not accommodate our schedule when they do that. So I think we're better off. For example, if it were to raise, policy 11, we would want to explain to them that historically our practice has been to interpret the no net fill rule as serving that. If they were to ask if it were to raise a sightline view shed issue, we would want to explain to them that historically our practice has been to deem that to include river views and shore views. I think we have to explain how we see the policies that we think are raised, because otherwise we're not going to get a lot of opportunities to explain our point of view to them. And my understanding is they'll work with us on this, but they'll do that a lot better if we explain how we think about the policies that we are looking for them to enforce here.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's obviously a critical location, right? I mean, it's visible from Harbor Island Park, flooding as far as the river getting out to the harbor, environmental and so on. So that works. Andrew, if you want to coordinate, I'm happy to do that with you. It's a lot of materials if you looked at what Thomas sent.
Sure.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Jack, please.
this is just lack of experience. They've been working there, correct?
Yes.
Are they asking us to approve something they're already doing?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I don't, tell me if anyone glanced more than I did. There is a ton of pages here, but this is, related, it looks like, to the widening of the bridge and the redrilling of shafts and piles in there. So I don't know if they've just gotten to that point of the prep work or what. I don't know. Does anyone know? I don't know.
Yeah, can I share some information on that, because it came as a bit of a revelation to me. I was copied on a email chain between engineers and DEC, and the emails just didn't. I wasn't familiar with the parties involved, so I just to ensure that I wasn't ignoring something that was super important. I called the last email that I received. It was an engineering outfit, and I said, I'm receiving these emails. I don't know what matter this is, what case it is, what it is about. And the engineer told me that it was part of the Boston Post Road Bridge, and I was being sent these emails as part of the Harbor Coastal Commission. So I asked him for a little background on what was going on, and that bridge was originally supposed to come down in its entirety and be rebuilt. And the engineer told me that they've since modified those plans and they're going to keep the bridge the way it is. And also, interestingly, that bridge, there's no steel in that bridge. That's an old, that bridge is so old. It's just a rock.
It's masonry.
It's masonry, but it's an art. I mean, all the structure comes from those big stones and from the fact that it's an arch. So I thought that was very interesting. And what they plan to do is just build onto that bridge to accommodate the pedestrian walkway on the south side. So the project's evolved. It's obviously much different than what it was originally, and I think that gives us some area to figure out exactly what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and how it fits into the 44 policies.
So is what they've done to date emergency work?
No, I think what they've
No.
done to date, I didn't hear any about emergency. What they've done to date is utility work. And I don't think they've done anything structural to the bridge because the bridge is sound enough to stay the way it is. What they're going to do is build basically another bridge, a pedestrian bridge on the harbor side of it. There's a river side and a harbor side.
Sure. So what you're saying is that they're talking about where they drop the footing for the new pedestrian crossover as what they're sending to us to talk about.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things. How is that bridge going to be supported? Where is it going to be? How's it going to impact the? That's obviously a piece of history there. It's an old stone bridge. Are they going to affect the current aesthetic of it? Now that opens. We were a little bit in the dark originally when they were going to take it down and rebuild it. We kind of knew what they were going to do, but now since the plan has changed, it opens up a bunch of new questions on what's going to be done and how it will be done. Does that answer your question?
Pretty much.
Okay.
They had come to us.
I don't understand. Does the state own all bridges?
I think they own this though. They own Route 1, right?
Yeah, Route 1's a state road, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Thank you.
Right.
Getting smarter every day. I got it.
Right.
Yeah, there are both the state and the county have they don't think of themselves as subject to the rules that private applicants are subject to. And the state at least has more of a basis for that, and they can impose a different policy on us. Procedurally, they told us about the bridge work, and we told them we don't see any showstoppers. However, we don't pass on consistency until we have a full application. And then by their actions, they showed us that that's not how they do things. And we learned a lesson from that. So this time we have to be much more specific in how we highlight to them any concerns we may have, because a polite invitation to come dialogue with us is not consistent with our policy. What we're going to have to do is explain exactly how we view our policies, how we would enforce them, what questions we would want the answers to, and what changes would need to be considered. And so we'll give them a fairly detailed letter.
And that goes to the engineer in District 8.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay.
Okay, so unless there's anything further on the bridge work, our last administrative item is our revised wetlands ordinance. By way of brief history, we passed back in December a recommended revised wetlands ordinance. It does a few things a little differently, especially in that it encompasses both tidal and freshwater, includes water courses, and it clarifies the wetlands authorities with Harbor Coastal. That got dropped somewhere on the way to Board of Trustees, and they have never taken it up. However, in between, it was pointed out to us that there were a few technical boo-boos in the version we passed after several attempts to get it through and a lot of very long evenings with other matters. There was a definition dropped. There was some other errors. We had circulated in time for the last work session a red line markup, and Seamus helpfully provided several comments at the work session. Those have been incorporated. I sent a version around tonight that should have dealt with those, mopped up the last few things, incorporated the synonym buffer for the adjacent area definition, and that sort of stuff. Is other than what Seamus outlined at the work session, it looks very like what was circulated ahead of the work session. And I would like to be able to get that up to the Board of Trustees for their consideration. Anybody have questions? All right, since this is essentially technical fixes to something we already passed, I think we can just go ahead and vote it. Andrew, this is to recommend the current as of this evening version of the wetlands ordinance to the Board of Trustees for passage. Andrew?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Seamus?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Jack?
Yes.
Cammie?
Yes.
And it's unanimous again. I vote aye, and we are recommending this in the version circulated in time for this meeting as our new wetlands ordinance to the Board of Trustees. With that, we have run our administrative agenda and our applicant agenda. The only other thing
Thomas,
that
can I interrupt you 1 second? Sorry, I just had a procedural question. Those revisions, I don't know, how do those get sent to the board? Do you handle that, or was that something Amber used to do and you need me to send it? I just wanted to make sure.
That was something Amber did. Let's touch base in the morning about procedure. I think what the red line additions become underlined text like the rest of the black line underlined text, and the red line strikeouts become black and white strikeout like the other struck out text.
Right, okay.
We can touch base about implementing that in the morning, because that's ministerial. Okay, having run the agenda, the only other thing that I think we can accomplish tonight is if we have an update on the litigation, we can go into executive session. That's really a question to you, Catherine. Do you have anything? And if so, we'll go into executive session.
I do not.
Okay, that makes life pretty easy. I'm going to, unless anybody's got something else, let me know now.
Are we having a work session next month?
So for the folks that are new, we implemented last winter when our administrative agenda had gotten extremely burdensome and we were in danger of seeing midnight come and go on some of these meetings. We implemented the work session 8 days before our meeting in order to make sure that we handled administrative items and the completeness of applicant agendas, but not the deliberation, just the completeness in a timely fashion to take some of the long nights out. It worked wonders, and we are now down to manageable agendas every time. We keep asking every month if we should keep the work session. It's for all of us, so I'm not trying to drive a result here. Folks, do we think that we need to have a work session for next month? Right now, I don't know of any applicant items, but those often come in late, and the administrative agenda is manageable. If you want to skip it, I'm amenable to that.
I think that potentially with the Post Road Bridge, which we're on a 30-day clock for, that this is inside of. And I, as much as I'd rather do this in one night rather than two, maybe it's a little easier virtually. We come up with things at that meeting that I think helps our, applicants. Usually we identify we need this environmental study and we get it done in a week. And so I continue to, for now, see some value to it, but it's a balance, right, among the burden of the extra time. So I'm up for it, but I'm fine if everyone decides we don't need it or it's just too much.
I personally find it to be useful, and sometimes it's very short. Make sure we have everything we need to, so I don't think it's particularly burdensome, but and I think your point about the bridge application, which I've been skimming through, is a good one. There's a lot there. So I think it makes sense. We can always, not have one if in a particular month it looks like there's not that much going on, but
Even in this one, if there's not much to talk about, it could be a 5-minute meeting and then it's,
right,
over and done with.
right.
Yeah, I think sometimes it only takes us 20 minutes, but I find them helpful too. Okay, let's plan on holding our work session.
And Thomas, I think we have a member of the public who has a question for us.
Yes, you do.
Sure.
Would you like
Sure,
me
we
to
can
mute them? Hold on one second. Okay, I believe you're able to speak.
Okay, can you hear me? Oh, good.
Yes.
My name is Catherine DeHaze. I live here in the village. I'm just wondering if your committee has had an opportunity or is planning to approach the New York State Department of Transportation to think about some of the floodwaters that may have come from the Interstate 95. I've been sort of looking into this, and earlier today was reading the New York State Department of Highway Design highway drainage chapter, legal aspects of highway drainage. The department is obligated by state and federal laws to protect the highway, of course, but also adjacent land beyond the highway from collected and concentrated flows, also floodplains, and also water quality and resources. So there's an obligation on the part of the Thruway Authority to concern itself with water that comes off the highway. My estimate, the highway travels through the village roughly about 2 miles. Much of that has water courses directly alongside it, the Sheldrake and Mamaroneck, Sheldrake to the south, where it comes out of Gardens Lake, passes underneath and goes up to the village. And then on the other side, the Mamaroneck River passing underneath near West Street and so forth. If you measure how much which I did, 2 miles of, put that into feet, the width of the highway, not counting all of the, not counting the clover leaves or exit ramps, simply a 6-lane wide highway. And we had roughly, that is, a certain number of square feet, over 1 million square feet, times 8 inches of rainfall, 0.67 of a foot of rainfall. It equates to roughly 5 million gallons of water that fell on 95 during the flood, a portion of which, maybe all of which, ended up in the village of Mamaroneck, in our rivers, and so forth. So this is seems to me something that is within your purview. Reading a little more deeply into the document, it's 135 pages. Near the end, it says, legal aspects on page 110 of this document, legal aspects of highway drainage. The collection and diversion of surface waters may result in discharges which create a flooding problem which did not exist prior to the project. A storage facility should be provided to mitigate the increased discharge resultant from the storm drainage system. So, I know there's all sorts of plans afoot with the Army Corps and so forth. Quite apart from that, I'm just wondering whether your commission is planning to look at the impacts that the highway, has on the flooding in the village. That highway was built in 1956, and we were in a very different world then. That's my question.
So the short answer to that is the Thruway Authority has a different set of powers from most other governmental agencies we interact with. And so we would, the first question for us is what do we have the ability to do to even hold them to any obligation that they have?
Mhm.
And then the second question is, if to the extent we have power to do something to make them mitigate the impact of that flood water, what in fact should we do? But given the impact of the flooding on this village that we've all seen recently, and that if you've lived here long enough, you've seen several times, we should always be asking what we can do to address flooding problems. Some of the houses I helped tear sheetrock out of last month had water levels over my head. We all drove around this village and saw people's entire worldly possessions out on the curb. Some of us helped people drag washing machines and refrigerators out that had been completely submerged. It will never not be an issue that we flood so badly in this village. And I am so fortunate. I live up in Harbor Heights and I was completely untouched. I can't say that for all my friends. It's a danger to our property, and for some people here, it's a danger to our lives. We never don't take that seriously. So the answer to your question is we should always be thinking about flooding. You've raised the issue of the Thruway Authority and I-95 and its impact. We're going to raise that with our support staff and our council and put it on as an administrative item to talk about it next time. Thank you for raising it. And we will revisit once again what we can do to reduce the danger of flooding here. If you've listened for a while, I think you know that we take our policies concerning floodplain safety as seriously as a mandate as any policy that we enforce here. You've raised a serious issue and we're going to address it.
Thank you very much. I have further ideas which I could share with you at some point in the future.
And of course, flood mitigation. First stop for floodplain concerns is always flood mitigation committee.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I think that, I think we've heard in the past from TJ Council, related to an issue with that 95 laydown yard. And he did seem, you know, pretty knowledgeable or had resourced those intergovernmental interactions. So, Thomas, it sounds like we'll raise that with them or Catherine, but it might be helpful to hear from TJ when we talk about that, you know, on his thoughts on what we could do.
Right. I think TJ has a lot of experience with the how you can and can't approach throughway authority. So we'll take that up offline in order to set up an agenda item for next time. And then we'll take that up in our work session. So it sounds like we've got another administrative item. I guess we're going to keep that work session. Okay. And with that, I think we've covered everything I think we need to cover. If anybody's got other business. Hearing none, I'm going to move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Thank you very much for your time, folks.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Have a good
Thanks,
night,
Stephen.
everyone.
Good night.
Thank
Bye
you.
all.